Hi sourdough lovers, Claire here. I made this group a while ago and had planned on making videos about how to sourdough, starting discussions, etc. But life was extremely busy. But my kids are in school full time now, so I do have a little bit more time. So I'm hopefully going to be able to contribute more to this group and teach you how to bake sourdough if you're new to it, and maybe teach you some tips to improve your sourdough if you've been baking for a while. So I have been baking sourdough since like 2018. I started when I lived in Florida. So I've baked sourdough in Florida, I've baked sourdough in Connecticut, I've baked sourdough now here at 7,400 feet of elevation. And I was honestly nervous when I moved here about baking because I heard that it was harder to bake at elevation, but I haven't really found that to be the case. And so yeah, let's get started. I think that you can still make some great sourdough at elevation. So some of the tools that I'm using, I think that you probably have most of these tools at your house. I have a medium-sized bowl. I have a food scale. This is one tool that if you don't have, I definitely would recommend it. I don't bake with cups and like tablespoons and teaspoons. I measure everything with a food scale. They're pretty inexpensive, under $10, I would say. So I have my bowl, I have my food scale, I have my sourdough starter. This is important. I keep mine in plastic because glass tends to be impossible to clean out, and then you may have some sourdough going down your sink, which is not ideal if you have a septic system. Whereas plastic, when you go to change it to the next container, it dries, and so you can actually just throw it in the trash, so you don't have to rinse it out down the sink. So I have my sourdough starter. Ideally, you'd have a very active sourdough starter. If you don't have one, I'm happy to gift you one so that you can get to baking yourself. I have 500 grams of flour. I already measured it out just because I didn't want to dump in 900 grams on accident. I use this Kirkland brand all-purpose flour. This is actually bread flour. This is a higher protein flour than typical all-purpose flour. So this is the flour that I like to use. And so that's what we have. I have a spoon for mixing. I have some warm water. I like warm water because the temperature of the ingredients, specifically the total mixture, impacts the speed of fermentation, and I don't want my fermentation to take all day, so I use warm water. There's this fear at altitude that fermentation occurs faster, so there's this huge fear of over fermentation. I don't find that to be a problem or a concern. In fact, most loaves I see are under fermented, so I don't want to spend all day fermenting, so I'm going to be using warm water. And then I have some salt. This is just some pink salt from Costco. You can use whatever kind of salt you want. Okay, so here is my recipe. I'm going to start by adding 325 grams of water to my bowl. This recipe is for one loaf. Okay, so there's 325 grams of water, and then I'm going to add 100 grams of starter to the bowl. Putting it close here. Okay, so I'm going to use what's left in this to feed my starter and use it for my next loaves. Okay, so I'm just going to stir up the water in the starter until it's incorporated. You can use your hands here if you want to, but I like to use my hands as little as possible during these steps because I don't want to get, I just don't like my hands to be a mess. Okay. So I've mixed up the starter in the water. I'm just going to set my spoon aside. And then I'm going to add 10 grams of salt. Doing this carefully so that I don't add too much salt. Okay, 10 grams of salt. Then I'm going to give it a stir again. And then I'm going to add the 500 grams of flour. I'm gonna set my scale aside because I don't like to mix and put pressure onto my scale. And then I'm just gonna start by mixing this with a spoon, and then I'm actually gonna put gloves on and finish incorporating it. So it seems like a lot of sourdough recipes out there that I see are not super hands-on with the dough, so there's not a whole lot of gluten development that goes on at the beginning stages of the bread making. And I think that that's a big mistake that a lot of people are using. I don't think that most home bakers are developing their gluten enough. So I'm gonna mix this up with my hands next, but I am going to put gloves on because this is not, sourdough isn't something that you want to be putting down your sink. So I like to use gloves to do this so that the stuff that's left over on my hands, I can just throw in the garbage. Okay, so just putting my gloves on, and then I'm gonna really get in here and mix this dough up really well. I'm just going to make sure that this is completely mixed up. Let's see, it's honestly not sticking to my gloves too much. This recipe is a little bit of a lower hydration than I typically use, but I think that this is a great beginner recipe. So I'm just gonna mix it, mix it, mix it. And when I feel like all of the flour is incorporated into the water, starter, and salt mixture, I'm gonna be done. I'm just gonna grab some of that flour that was on the sides and keep mixing it. Okay, take off any extra that I have. All right, so now I'm going to cover this with the lid for it, right here. I'm just gonna cover it lightly with the lid, and then I'm gonna put it aside, and I'm gonna let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, depending on when I get back to it.